attack against the United States of America. It began just after 8:45 this morning when a hijacked airliner smashed into one of the World Trade Center towers in New York. Then 15 minutes later, a second hijacked airplane crashed into the other tower. Both buildings burst into flames, and scores of people tried to scramble to safety. A few minutes later, outside Washington, another hijacked airliner crashed, this one straight into the Pentagon. Then at 10, the first tower in New York to be hit buckled and crumbled to the ground. It looked as if someone had imploded the high-rise. At the same time, another hijacked airliner crashed, this one into a field outside Johnstown, Pennsylvania. 28 minutes after that, the second World Trade Center building teetered and then also collapsed. The government officials were quick to call the day's events acts of terrorism and moved to put the nation into a high state of alert. That included landing every commercial plane in the skies and shutting all airports. President Bush was shuttled from one secret location to the next. And in the Philadelphia area, schools, offices, and businesses all shut their doors. A day like no other in the history of this country, and we don't know the extent of the casualties yet. President Bush addressed the nation tonight from the Oval Office. He vowed to avenge the killings and praised the strength of this country.
Great nation. Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shatter steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve.
The president also asked the country to pray for the families of the victims. The speech was pulled together a few hours after the president returned from a day of bouncing around the country. He had been in Florida promoting his education agenda when he got word of the World Trade bombings. After that, he was taken to an Air Force base in Louisiana, then to an underground bunker in Nebraska, before being whisked back to Washington, D.C. with military fighter jets at the wing of Air Force One. There is still no way of telling how many people are dead or wounded in today's attack, as the efforts to begin digging through the wreckage are just now beginning. Action News reporter Nora Mushanek is live at Liberty State Park in New Jersey, just across the mouth of the Hudson River from what used to be the World Trade Center. Nora?
Good evening, Jim, and it is an amazing sight behind me, the dark and smoky New York skyline without the Twin Towers standing tall. Now, Liberty State Park remains a triage area at this hour. In addition to the untold bodies being brought over here, it's estimated as many as 2,000 of the injured have been brought by ferry from the financial district in Manhattan over here to Liberty State Park to the waterfront here. Tonight, we visited the Jersey City Medical Center, which has been in disaster mode all day. We talked with several of the survivors, including a New York firefighter who told me he didn't think he would live through this day.
I never thought that I was going to survive this. I just gave up, honestly. I just figured, hey, that's what my job is all about.
Lieutenant Joe Torillo is a New York firefighter and father of 4 who's nursing head injuries and thought when debris rained down from the second plane crashing into the Twin Towers that he was a goner.
Now, I took one quick look over my shoulder and I knew I wasn't getting away from it. Basically, I tried, but it all hit a bunch of us. We were all buried, and all of a sudden, there was no daylight. It was just pitch black.
Along with many other victims, several New York police and firefighters are being treated at the hospital. Their families have been arriving nonstop, thankful they're alive.
I had my head down in the grass, and I had my ripped undershirt in my face, trying to pray to God that it wasn't a chemical or a nuclear or some kind of biological debris that's coming at us.
This firefighter is being treated for respiratory problems and chest pains at the medical center, which went into external disaster mode right after the scope of the attack was clear.
We had our first patient who walked in with burns of the upper body. And then from then on, we had well over 130 people come through our ER.
We tried to decide which patients needed immediate attention as opposed to those who may be a little more stable.
New Jersey National Guard troops had additional ambulances standing by if needed.
We're supposed to be taking any influx casualties that come over. If they're walking wounded, we can bring them back over to the armory.
The emergency room at the medical center looked like Grand Central Station as doctors and nurses worked to treat the injured. The gravity of it all brought some to tears. Others described the scene this way.
Devastating. It's horrific. It's incomprehensible. You almost can't imagine it. You're seeing it and you can't imagine it.
We're back live now looking at the New York skyline without the Twin Towers. It's still smoking at this hour in downtown Manhattan. Lieutenant Joe Turillo, the first firefighter you saw in this piece, says he wouldn't be alive tonight were it not for a Marine unit from the New Jersey State Police. They put him on a boat and backed away from the financial district as a cloud of dust enveloped them. They couldn't see, but they cut the ropes and sped across the Hudson to get him to a hospital here tonight, or earlier today. Meanwhile, as they pick through the rubble and are searching for survivors in New York City, ambulances and hospitals in New Jersey are still on standby and ready to take more patients, more victims as they find them. New Jersey remains in a state of emergency, and the New York skyline is changed forever, as are so many lives, the lives of people affected, injured, killed in this disaster, this terrorist strike today in New York City. Reporting live from Liberty State Park in Jersey City, I'm Nora Mushanek, Channel 6 Action News. Jim?
Thank you, Nora. Although the first attack on the World Trade Center was not, as far as we know, captured on video, many people had their cameras rolling as the second plane hit the second building. We're going to show you some of those pictures now. This picture taken from the ground by a tourist who was filming the first attack when the second plane approached the Trade Center. Another amateur photographer was focused on the plane as it approached Manhattan, and he followed it as the plane sheared the building. And this video comes from a news photographer who was shooting the aftermath of the first attack.
I saw a plane flying into my viewfinder and said, gee, it's kind of close for that to be here now, and then realized what happened. Yeah. And
we'll run this again.
As you can imagine, chaos erupted on the streets of Manhattan today as the dust and debris from the World Trade Towers rained down. Here now is some of the reaction from witnesses and some of the frightening images captured as the disaster unfolded.
See, like when you see the firemen, there's nothing they can do. It's just like amazing.
You must have been frightened at the very least to be there.
I mean, I was just thinking to myself what a powerful act of ignorance it was, really. It's amazing.
And this is the building adjacent to.
That's the Twin Towers. That was the Twin Tower. That was the other tower. And then we went up more into there.
You know, I just thought to myself I can smell it, but in fact what I can do is smell your shirt. Yeah. You brought the smell of this disaster with you on your T-shirt. Were there other people in there? I don't see anybody sort of.
No, I was with one other person I ran into there, who actually somebody I know, and he was photographing as well. And it was just us two and the firemen. It was funny.
I was up in my office on the northwest corner of the 82nd floor. I heard a noise like a sonic boom almost, and then a blast. The building swayed, it shook a little bit. I saw papers fly out of the middle of the building.
We heard a big bang, and then we saw smoke coming out, and everybody started running out, and we saw the plane on the other side of the building, and there was smoke everywhere, and people are jumping out the windows. Over there, they're jumping out the windows, I guess because they're trying to save themselves. I don't know. And I don't know, everybody just doesn't know where to go. They won't everything is blocked off. You can't even, they're telling us to get out, but there's nowhere to go. And then I heard that another plane hit, and if you go over by there, you can see the people jumping out the window. They're jumping out the window right now. Oh my God.
Because all I can see are people. I don't see a building, I see people. People hurt. Children without mothers and fathers tonight.
I see you're bloody. You have dust all over you.
Yeah, it was bad. It was like a dust storm or something. Like I couldn't see anything.
How badly are you hurt?
I have no idea.
The nation's capital remains on high alert tonight. Action News reporter John Rollins has been monitoring the situation in Washington all day and tonight. He is now live from his perch overlooking the White House. John?
Well, Jim, firefighters continue to pour water on the Pentagon this evening. Late this afternoon, special rescue crews were brought in here. Rescue crews used after earthquakes. They have dogs that can hopefully find survivors. The whole idea is they hope they will find some survivors somewhere in that problemed area over there. If not, they will be there for the recovery of bodies. No official count of fatalities at this point as far as the Pentagon is concerned. No one believes anyone aboard Flight 77, an American Airlines flight that slammed into the Pentagon at 9:40 this morning, survived it. According to the Washington Post, though, prior to the impact, a number of people made phone calls from that aircraft. One person described the hijackers as having knives and a box cutter. They did not mention any guns at this point. The Post also reports another family from the Washington area was forced, it said, to call loved ones to tell them they were about to die. Many people here in Washington described what happened here today as an act of war, among them Pennsylvania's senior senator.
Well, there's no doubt it's an act of war. Terrorism is a way of people trying to accomplish their political objectives when they're not able to go to full-scale war, but it's a war. The destruction of the Trade Center with the two towers containing, the reports are, some 50,000 people and so many people around, and the attack at the Pentagon is a war. There's no doubt about it.
It wasn't martial law, but on the streets of the Capitol, Humvees and National Guard MPs, here, if needed, to back up civilian authorities.
What goes through my mind is just to be prepared to support the president and whatever he do, and to support the people of D.C.
But the streets were quiet. Most Washingtonians chose to stay home. A few came here to the grounds of the National Cathedral, to the St. Albans Parish Church, to pray for their nation.
I don't think anything's ever going to be the same in America again. Pearl Harbor changed America drastically, and this will change America drastically.
Thousands of people lost their lives today, and we have no idea why, and it's not over. I came to pray that it's over, that it's not going to go on anymore, because then thousands more people are going to lose their lives, and I didn't ever think that I would see a war in my life.
From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans, wide flow. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
Again, to prove the fact that Americans are united, members of the House and Senate tonight joined together to sing God Bless America. They will reconvene tomorrow on the Hill, surely under very heavy security, to condemn the attacks on America today. Live in Washington, John Rollins, Channel 6, Action News.
John, before you go, there is word from a major news organization that as many as 800 people are missing in the wake of the crash at the Pentagon today. Have you heard a number like that around Washington?
We have not heard numbers, Jim. We have heard in the hundreds. That's what we heard, in the hundreds, but not a specific number like that, 800. We have not heard that number. It's certainly possible. It is a very, very large building. There were 64 people, I believe, aboard the aircraft. That's the numbers that American Airlines released.
That's correct. Thank you, John. Rollins reporting live from Washington. Now, the last of the 4 airliners that crashed today went down in rural Somerset County, Pennsylvania. United Airlines Flight 93 took off from Newark, New Jersey at 8:01 this morning, bound for San Francisco, but it plunged to earth in a field near Shanksville, some 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. The Boeing 757 got as far west as Cleveland before it made a sharp turn and headed back into Pennsylvania. Someone with a cell phone locked in the plane's restroom sent the message, "We are being hijacked," just minutes before the crash. There were 45 people on the plane. None survived. One congressman, a Democrat from Virginia, believes the plane's target was Camp David, the presidential retreat in the Maryland mountains near the Pennsylvania border, but there has been no official confirmation of that. And that jetliner may have carried a crew member from South Jersey. New Jersey correspondent Karen Rogers is live in Marlton tonight, where a family is anxiously awaiting news of their loved one. Karen?
Jim, friends of Leroy Homer tell me that right now they are in the house, they are with the family, they are grieving, and they are watching news reports because they say they have not heard anything officially from United. Leroy Homer is a United Airlines crew member. It is feared that he was on that flight that crashed near Pittsburgh today, but family members tell me until they hear an official word from United, they will hold on to hope. Police are barricading the street where the Homer family lives. Leroy Homer is a United Airlines crew member who is missing. I spoke with family friends who say they are grieving and waiting for some official word from United.
Official word comes from the company. You really can't make a 100% determination whether he was involved in the incident. Crews get swapped apparently, from what we've been told. Things happen, so until we get confirmation from the company, I just don't think it's appropriate to comment.
He's a great guy. He is a super guy. That's about all I can say. He's a super guy.
It's feared Leroy Homer was on United Flight 93, which crashed this morning near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The Boeing 757 left Newark, New Jersey this morning, heading for San Francisco. Hijackers may have taken control of the plane near Cleveland, and there are reports that someone from the cockpit called the FAA requesting a change in flight plans to Washington, D.C. The plane crashed shortly thereafter. 45 people were on board. There were no survivors. Neighbors are responding to the fear that Leroy Homer was a crew member on that plane.
A lot of people conjectured that the pilots perhaps have done things to divert planes from potential targets in the area, and this man may have been very much so been a hero. And maybe we'll never know that, but I know that the people around here, believe that that is a possibility, and this man actually could have been a hero.
Family representatives say, and understandably so, that they want to maintain their privacy as much as they can. They haven't released any information about Leroy Holmes or his position at United, just saying that he's a crew member. But they did say that they are waited for word from United. They are holding by the telephone, hoping to hear something so they know what to think for sure. And until then, the nation is grieving with them. Live in Marlton, New Jersey, I'm Karen Rogers, Channel 6 Action News. Jen?
Thank you, Karen. Now let's go to Action News. Reporter Dan Cuellar, live in Lower Makefield, Bucks County. And Dan, tell us the story about Victor Saraceni.
Well, Jim, we cannot begin to imagine the pain and grief being felt here in Lower Makefield among the widow of Victor Saraceni, Ellen, their two young children, Kirsten and Brielle, as well as other relatives, co-workers, and friends. They have been very gracious in the face of this tremendous tragedy, asking for privacy, while at the same time trying to let us know who Victor Saraceni was. A loving husband and father, co-workers say 51-year-old Saraceni had been with United Airlines since 1985, with much prior experience as a pilot of commercial jetliners.
Good family man, good friend, great pilot, and we're going to miss him a bunch. And my heart goes out to everybody, everywhere in this whole event.
Victor Saraceni's co-workers came here to console his widow Ellen and two young children, now said to be in a state of unimaginable grief.
At this point, I think prayers are about the only thing we can offer until this whole mess is sorted out. But I know the Saraceni family would appreciate any prayers that can be offered. This is going to be a very, very difficult time for them.
It's been a difficult time for Saraceni's co-workers after seeing images of his Boeing 767 crashing into the South World Trade Center tower after it was commandeered by terrorists.
It's unspeakable. There are no words to describe it. I wish I could. I can't even imagine. This is like my worst nightmare you ever could imagine. This sort of a thing. This is the stuff of Tom Clancy books, right. And now it's suddenly realities.
In the neighborhood, there was a deep feeling of sadness.
It's just something you don't really know how to cope. There's not much that you can do. You stay glued to your television set and you want something to happen.
But try to imagine what neighbor Candace Benvenuto must have felt when she saw news crews and thought they were coming to tell her her husband was dead because she hadn't heard from him in New York.
And then they told me that it was Mr. Saraceni, and I can't believe in our own neighborhood. We're so protected here, and we think we're so safe, and we're not. We're just not. It touches everybody.
Well, fortunately, her husband did show up finally, unhurt. He was unable to get through on the phone. A prayer service for Saraceni and the other victims was being held at nearby St. Ignatius in Yardley. In the face of feeling hopeless and not knowing what to do, neighbors say it was the least that they could do at a time like this. Live in Lower Makefield, Dan Cuellar, Channel 6 Action News.
Victor Saraceni, the pilot of that second plane that crashed into the Twin Towers today in New York. Thank you very much, Dan. Now, for the next few moments, we're going to be showing you the school closings that we have already received for tomorrow, and it will be running at the bottom of your screen for the next period of time. Meanwhile, Philadelphia Mayor John Street went on television tonight to detail the city's response to today's terror attacks in New York and at the Pentagon. Action News reporter Matt O'Donnell is live at City Hall with that part of our story tonight.
Jim, tomorrow the city of Philadelphia will return to normal. Almost. First, let's set the scene for you. Across the city, all flags, all American flags have been ordered to fly at half-staff, as I imagine they are all across the country. All city workers will return to their jobs tomorrow. All government offices will be open again, but public schools will remain idle in Philadelphia. All public schools will be closed tomorrow. However, all workers within the school district are expected to report to their jobs. All parochial schools will be open, and that's a problem because since the public schools are closed, all the buses will not be running, so any of the parochial school students will have to find their own means of transportation to get to school. Earlier tonight, Mayor John Street talked about what went on inside City Hall here when information began to come in.
The reaction was, this is a beginning, not the end of it.
That was the reaction of Mayor Street and his staff when the first World Trade Center building was struck by a plane. Somehow, Street says he knew the situation would have to be addressed here in Philadelphia. 2 hours later, city workers and public school students were sent home. Tonight on Channel 6, the mayor announced that city workers would return to their jobs tomorrow, but public school students will get another day off.
After having spoken with the psychologists and the psychiatrists and all of the professionals, we believe that it is appropriate for us.
The mayor says he's happy with how everyone in Center City reacted late this morning. The streets were clogged, the buses were full, but there was no widespread panic.
It's time to go. We knew we'd have to leave. You could kind of feel it in the air that we would have to leave.
We knew what was going on in the city, and we felt real good about it. But you can never, ever take anything for granted, and you can't be too cautious.
The mayor says he is absolutely certain that no Philadelphia sites or area Philadelphia sites were targeted, and that is why he is encouraging all of the members of the business community, even those that were in the high rises that were told to leave Philadelphia today, to return to work tomorrow. We can also tell you that several Philadelphia firefighters and possibly a number of police officers from Philadelphia will be heading up to New York City tomorrow to deal with the World Trade Center aftermath. Live in Center City, Matt O'Donnell, Channel 6 Action News. Jim.
Thank you, Matt. As we told you just a few moments ago, the fourth hijacked plane today, crashed in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. And there was a report that that plane was targeting Camp David, the presidential retreat in the Maryland mountains. Now, Action News reporter Michelle McCormack is live in Shanksville, Somerset County, near the scene of the crash. Michelle, what's going on there tonight?
Well, Jim, I'm standing in an area known by the locals as Stony Creek Township. About a mile behind me, state troopers have roped off a 3 by 5 mile crime scene, which includes a 30 by 30 foot crater where the largest piece of plane debris is no bigger than a piece of paper. The debris of United Flight 93 is so scattered that investigators for the time being are focusing on mapping out its exact dimensions. The most difficult task comes with daylight.
Right now, it's the painstaking collection of evidence and the dignified treatment of all the victims in this case.
Suspected as part of a series of attacks, the crash is all the more chilling when you consider someone made a 911 call claiming to be on board the plane and declaring that a hijacking was underway. This coal miner among the witnesses on the ground who saw what happened next.
This plane, it was completely upside down is what it was. The tail fin was down, and it was going in at a sharp ascent, probably more than a 45-degree angle, closer to a 90-degree angle.
Investigators will only confirm that a call was made, and the governor who visited the site personally is asking Pennsylvanians to focus on prayer as a way of coping.
There aren't enough words, but I guess the range of emotion goes from rage and anger to sorrow to horror to, I guess, a sense of nausea that we all experience and feel.
Some eyewitnesses say they saw flames coming from the plane. Other eyewitnesses say there was no fire. Either way, where they are consistent is that the plane was intact, albeit inverted, but intact when it hit the ground. So far, no recovery of the voice recorders, the so-called black boxes. After all, this debris field is expansive. The loss of 38 passengers and 7 flight attendants, immeasurable. Live in Stony Creek Township, Michelle McCormack, Channel 6 Action News. Jim?
Michelle, I think we have to acknowledge, and I'm sure you've heard the same reports or rumors that we have here, that this plane was shot down. Shot down perhaps by the United States government because by this time they knew what was going on and that they were concerned this plane was targeting another government outpost. I'm sure many of our viewers have heard those rumors. We're not saying it's true. We have no idea if it's true, but the rumors are out there. I think we have to acknowledge them. What have you heard at that location as to that scenario?
Well, Jim, those reports might have been fueled by the fact that there's not a lot of television stations out in this rural area. You have a lot of talk radio, and that has been the speculation that has been thrown out on the radio waves all day, at least from what I have been listening to. The FBI, however, will not even acknowledge the reports as of yet. They have a press conference at noon tomorrow. Jim?
Michelle McCormack in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Thank you, Michelle. Many young adults, many older adults, people in their late 40s, early 50s, clearly remember sitting in their classrooms in school as kids and hearing the news about the assassination of President John Kennedy. It is likely that today's events will stay in the memories of today's children in very much the same way. Nearly all area schools sent their students home late this morning, like these youngsters at Olney High School. Health officials say younger students in particular may need a great deal of reassuring from parents and caregivers. They encourage parents to talk to their kids about their feelings. The city of Philadelphia is setting up a counseling hotline for parents to get advice on dealing with the possible trauma of today's events. 30 counselors will be on duty beginning tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. The number to call then is 215-683-9000. That is 215-683-9000, beginning at 9 a.m. Action News reporter Vernon Odom is live at the Liberty Bell tonight, where security went on high alert within minutes of today's attacks in New York and Washington. Vernon, you've got the story there.
Jim, it has remained quiet and peaceful here all throughout the night at Independence Mall, where security does remain on high alert as it has been on all day on into the evening. Now, there has been a new development tonight. About a half hour ago, the federal park officials reversed their earlier position. The tourist sites like the Liberty Bell, Independence Hall, and Congress Hall will be open for business tomorrow to tourists. That is a reversal of the policy announced earlier this evening by park officials. It has been a tense and at times tumultuous day here in the Old City section and throughout Center City.
I'm panicked because of what's going on here. They're simultaneously crashing planes all over the place.
This Philadelphia lawyer was frantically trying to make her way across Center City this afternoon to pick up her daughter. She was caught up in traffic jams as the high-rises and government offices shut down early, sending their workers home en masse.
Just shocked more than anything. It's just I work in the investment industry, and we have a lot of people up in the World Trades that we do business with. So it's quite shocking to us.
The Liberty Bell and other historic sites shut down late this morning out of fear those places could have become terrorist targets as well. Federal buildings were cleared out as well by midday as the scope of today's developments became clear.
Whatever group is responsible, or groups, for whatever their cause is, again I say, it's a despicable act. It's a cowardly act.
Tonight, as tourists trickled past the Liberty Bell, they reflected on today's horrific crimes.
Shock, sadness, disappointment, almost embarrassment that in this day and age that the world's still acting like this.
Local Arab Americans fear they'll be targets of revenge as they were after the Oklahoma City bombing back in the spring of 1995.
Well, we had people beaten up. We had incidents against our community because people made it, we're taking revenge on the community. And we do not want this to happen. We are just as American as anyone else.
Jim, again, federal park officials announced within the last half hour that the Liberty Bell and other historic sites here in Independence Mall will be open for the public tomorrow. A reversal of the plan they announced earlier in the evening. A citizens group is planning a candlelight vigil here near the Liberty Bell tonight. Live at Independence Mall, Vernon Odom, Channel 6 Action News. Jim?
Thank you, Vernon. The government moved very quickly today to force every airplane in the sky to land at the nearest domestic airport. After that, every airport was shut down until further notice, and that further notice won't come until tomorrow. Action News reporter Lauren Wilson live at Philadelphia International tonight with that part of our story. Lauren?
Jim, this airport looks a lot like a ghost town. There's only a skeleton crew here, and I'm able to walk right in the middle of the street, which I normally wouldn't be able to do at this hour. But of course, there's been nothing normal about this day. The 1,400 planes that usually fly in and out of this airport on a daily basis were grounded right after the terrorist attack. Thousands of people were sent home. Now, people who live locally were lucky. Those from out of state were told to find hotel rooms, and they had to do so with or without their luggage. Now, airport officials aren't commenting. They're saying that all comments have to come out of the mayor's office. That's a first. This is also the first time the airport has been forced to close down because of a terrorist attack. I can tell you that security has been heightened. There are plenty of police on the property. Live at the airport, Lauren Wilson, Channel 6 Action News.
Thank you, Lauren. Canceled flights created plenty of headaches in Atlantic City. At the international airport there, Action News found a heavy police presence out front and a jammed concourse inside as airline personnel tried to explain the situation to stranded travelers. As in every other U.S. airport today, the only planes allowed in and out, military flights sanctioned by the FAA. Amtrak has resumed rail operations on the Northeast Corridor tonight after suspending service this morning. 30th Street Station was evacuated as a precaution shortly after the attacks. SWAT teams arrived and taped off the perimeter, but the station reopened several hours later. Amtrak is running hourly service tonight out of Union Station in Washington and expects to operate a regular weekday train schedule tomorrow. A total of 4 commercial hijacked jetliners crashed today. American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to L.A. crashed into the First World Trade Center building. 92 people were on board. United Flight 175 traveling from Boston to Los Angeles hit the Second World Trade Tower building. 65 people were on board. American Airlines Flight 77 going from Washington to Los Angeles slammed into the Pentagon. There were 64 people on that flight. And United Airlines Flight 93 from Newark to San Francisco hijacked, crashed in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, with a total of 45 people on board. World reaction to the attacks has run the gamut from shock and outrage in most places to celebration in parts of the Middle East. British Prime Minister Tony Blair expressed his condolences to the American people, then grounded every flight to America, even recalling some planes mid-flight. French President Jacques Chirac joined other European leaders in denouncing the attacks as Europe's stock exchanges spiraled out of control, some closing at all-time lows. Russian President Vladimir Putin put his nation on high alert and indicated his support for a strong U.S. response. But in East Jerusalem and parts of the West Bank, it was a day to celebrate. Palestinians upset with America's support of Israel staged impromptu victory rallies this morning after word of the attacks came down. Earlier this evening, pictures of explosions in Afghanistan's capital prompted speculation that the United States might be launching some kind of retaliatory airstrikes. Afghanistan is known to be sheltering terrorist Osama bin Laden. But there were no sounds of airplanes or anti-aircraft fire, and tonight, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld flatly denied any American involvement. There is, in fact, a civil war going on in Afghanistan. It's been going on for years. Officials say the explosions were probably related to that fighting. Back in our area, churches, temples, and mosques have been offering support to those trying to cope with this tragedy. In Winfield, in Philadelphia, St. Joseph's University held a special prayer service tonight. Dozens of people attended. Some shared stories of thanks that people they knew in Lower Manhattan today were spared the worst. And as Scott Palmer reports, it was a scene repeated in other Delaware Valley communities as well.
Gather us together as strangers.
Summit Presbyterian Church in Germantown opened tonight for an interfaith prayer service against terrorism. They came young and old, Christian, Jew, and Muslim, many in tears, and all of them looking for consolation.
We gather here from all of our traditions to testify to the fact that no matter what happens, that there is a higher power, a greater spirit that lives within that can help us overcome adversity and meet any situation.
Reverend Bill Levering was joined by Rabbi Marsha Prager and a Muslim Sufi who, fearing reprisals against his family, asked not to appear on camera.
The most important messages, I think, in the world are not messages against, but messages for the kind of world that we need and want to build together.
Even as this interfaith congregation came together here in peace, one of the worshipers had a close personal encounter with today's unthinkable acts of terrorism.
Marcia Zakaria's daughter Sherry worked on the 32nd floor of the World Trade Center. But instead of being in New York today, she was on a business trip to Denver.
And I have no idea what happened to her colleagues. I don't know that yet. All the families. I mean, our family was spared, and yet we're not spared. You know, none of us are spared.
In Germantown, I'm Scott Palmer, Channel 6 Action News.
And as we leave you tonight, we take a final look for this night at Lower Manhattan. The task ahead defies the imagination, and what rescuers may find defies human comprehension. It strikes me that Philadelphians and people who live in the Philadelphia area have often viewed New York with a fair measure of resentment, perhaps a touch of envy, but also a touch of disdain. But on this night, from New Hope to Camden to Philadelphia to Gloucester City to Claymont, Delaware, we are all New Yorkers tonight, and as New York fights back, so shall we all. Nightline is next on Channel 6. Action News returns at 5 with the very latest overnight information from Monica Malpass, Rick Williams, and Cecily Tynan. Now for the entire Action News team, I'm Jim Gardner. Good night.
This is an ABC News special report.
The entire day has been a special report on ABC News, and if you've managed to get your hands on a newspaper in various parts of the country today, you know that your local newspaper has devoted a huge amount of attention to this, and not only in the cities where this occurred, but in Pennsylvania where one of the aircraft went down, and in every city and community across the country, how the country was itself involved. We are, those of us who are working in newsrooms and conveying information, are isolated in the same way that you are. And we do our best in the course of this day to get you close to what has happened and help all of us get closer to understanding why this has happened and what the United States intends to do about it. First, in simple terms of responding before the world to the action which is taken against the country today, and what the United States might do if and or when it is able to discover those people who are responsible for this, those individuals, whether members of an organization, and perhaps that state or states, which, if you listen to Larry Eagleburger, former senior official at the State Department and in the White House for many years, believe should require, and a lot of people in the country will sympathize with this notion, an attack on any government that may have been party to these attacks on the United States today. But I think probably the best thing we can do at the moment in describing this day of warfare, 21st century style, as one historian referred to it today, is to go to Diane Sawyer, who has managed to compile much of what we have seen in New York today. Then we'll go to Washington, and then we'll try to pull it all together for you in the next few minutes and proceed with our coverage from there. So here's Diane.
Look at this moment once again. A colossus, wounded, and next to it, another giant with no shield. We cannot see inside, but thousands of people are fighting fire and fumes and fear, making their way down endless staircases, trying to escape before this.
A huge explosion now, raining debris on all of us. We better get out of the way.
No one knows what's next. People are running for their lives.
And all of a sudden, it was this big explosion. I don't know if it's just like what you just seen. That's what we went through before we came out of the building. Then when we get out the building, then another smoke cloud came. We had to go through that smoke cloud again. Mom, I just want you to know I'm all right.
And then we saw the people jumping. We saw what we thought was debris, and we realized it was people jumping. I can't do anymore.
The second tower collapses.
Oh my God, there it goes!
And tonight, where New York's tallest buildings proclaimed America's secular might, a ruin, countless souls crushed beneath. Some of them, we're told, were on the phone, saying farewell to their families as the building burned. Some of them, the firefighters, the police, there not by order, but by spirit.
It's the most tragic thing that has happened to America by far. I've been on the fire department 20 years and never lived through this. I lived through 2 collapses today. I'm on vacation from the fire department. I came in on my own. My car's all wrecked, and I just came in to help people and do my job.
And those who perished in the planes also phoning to warn the world that they were now riding in weapons of war.
We've been attacked. It's like World War II. It's World War II. This is unbelievable.
Was there no defense for the Pentagon? And what happened aboard the flight that crashed outside Pittsburgh? We've heard a story that the pilot refused to hurl his plane on Washington and crashed in a field instead. Hospitals filled with wounded, strangers volunteering to give blood. In the ashes, rededication by a nation whose symbol is the eagle because it is the bird least afraid of a storm, the bird strong enough to soar through and above it.
As we said, we want to try to get you close to this, and one of the difficulties at the Pentagon has been that ABC's John McWethy, who has an office for ABC News in the Pentagon, was on the other side of the Pentagon complex from where this attack took place this morning. You know, there were 4 aircraft involved. One of them crashed in rural Pennsylvania, but an American Airlines plane, American Flight 11, on which 81 passengers and 11 crew died. This was a flight hijacked by the terrorists as it was originally scheduled to go from Boston to Los Angeles. Then the United Airlines flight 767 with 56 passengers and a crew of 9 on board, which took off from Boston on its way to Los Angeles, was crashed into the other World Trade Center. And then at 9:38, another American 757 crashed into the Pentagon, where 58 passengers and 6 crew on that aircraft died. And one of the important things in terms of looking at the explosions throughout the day we've been made aware of by people paying close attention is that whatever the terrorists used on the particular aircraft to subdue the crew, get into the cockpit, and it is widely believed by people who've analyzed this, but that's all it is at the moment, themselves went to the controls. It's been a conventional piece of wisdom from the very beginning that no American airline captain could or would accept the notion of flying his own aircraft into one of these targets. And while we have no idea at this point, and may never have any idea what happened in the cockpits of those particular aircraft, there has been some suggestion today that there are terrorists out there throughout the world and terrorist organizations who are able to enlist people who have some flying capacity, some flying ability. And John Nance, who is our aviation analyst, and others have pointed out that there were pilots who flew in the Afghan Air Force or who flew with the Afghans during the struggle between Afghanistan and the Soviet Union. So there's a lot of talent out there in terms of international terrorism in general. But now, as we make our way through the day, we go back to the Pentagon. John McWethy, like everybody else, was obliged to evacuate from the Pentagon. He's on the side of the Pentagon which was attacked and has had a difficult day, but a tough day, John, trying to report this story from this location. So just review for us, would you?
Peter, I was sitting at my desk in the Pentagon when there was a jolt, and it was clear that the Pentagon had been hit just as the 2 towers of the World Trade Center had been hit. Horrible clouds of black smoke were billowing out of the Defense Department. A sense of disbelief as people were being forced to evacuate the building. In the part where the greatest damage was, there were many terribly injured people who were being helped by their colleagues out to the pavement outside. Hundreds and hundreds of rescue workers were on the scene within hours. Ambulances were lined up. Bodies were also lined up. There was a tremendous sense of the medical people trying to come to aid of those who were injured. But it took more than 5 hours for rescue workers to really get inside the damaged part of the Pentagon. And tonight, Peter, they are continuing the work. They have heavy equipment. They are working under lights. There are special dogs that are trained to look for dead bodies and to look for survivors both, who are working in the rubble tonight to see if they can pull anyone out of the rubble. We know tonight, Peter, that various jurisdictions, New York, for example, has called up more than 2,000 National Guard. By morning, there will be an additional 1,000. This is to help with control of intersections in the streets. In Virginia, more than 300 have been called up, and about the same number in the District of Columbia. For a while, the intersections in the District of Columbia in Northern Virginia and in much of New York appeared to be a very tightly controlled area by the military, by the police. There was very little movement of traffic in any of these jurisdictions. The government is going to great lengths. The president tonight saying that the government is going to be open for business tomorrow. But of course, much of the country today was utterly paralyzed from one coast to the other because of the airline cancellations, because of the cell phone tie-ups, and because of so much else that has happened during the course of this day, Peter.
And John, just before we leave you for just a little while, would you review for us what your sources believe the casualty estimates are at this moment?
There is no estimate for what has happened in New York that I know of, although they fear the casualties there are going to be many, many thousands. We are hearing from one local official here, Peter, that there could be as many as 800 dead in the Pentagon.
Thanks very much, John McWethy at the Pentagon, as close to the Pentagon as he's allowed to get tonight, reporting under very difficult circumstances. Cynthia McFadden is on the west side of New York City in what we keep describing as the trauma center, where triage was originally meant to occur. Do you have any further sense or any closer sense of the magnitude of this in terms of human loss?
Well, Peter, what I can tell you is this. We have talked to sources who have been inside the triage center all day and asked them why the volume of extreme trauma, why the number of people just hasn't been seen. You can see this parade of ambulances, I think, behind me here. We've been seeing ambulances come through all day and rescue vehicles, all of them, for the most part, empty, with the exception of some rescue workers and some other rescuers at the scene. But by and large, they have been walking into this center, not the kind of severe trauma. When I just asked why they weren't here, someone simply said, Cynthia, it's because the victims are dead.
No, thanks, Cynthia McFadden. Cynthia McFadden. I said a short while ago that we'd only actually publicly identified one person, one individual who died today, and that was the wife of the Solicitor General of the United States, Barbara Olson. I got her first name right, I think. Barbara Olson, who was on the aircraft that attacked the Pentagon and was able to communicate with her husband, to whom we obviously extend our deepest, just everybody who knows him must be thinking about his tragedy tonight and the potential for tragedy for so many other people. But Mayor Giuliani in New York has now given us some sense of loss in the firefighting contingent in New York City, because as you couldn't help but see in an instance like this, when every civilian in his or her right mind was running away from things, the firefighters and the police, but particularly the firefighters, were running in the direction of disaster. And 3 top city fire department officials died at the scene of the World Trade Center devastation today. One of them, Ray Downey, the chief of Special Operations Command, ironically was in charge of the New York City contingent that was sent to Oklahoma City at the time of the bombing. And Chief Downey has lost his life. Also killed tonight from the ranks of the firefighters in New York City were the first deputy commissioner, William Feehan, and the chief of the department, Peter Ganchi. I believe that's the correct pronunciation. Just telling us, as we already knew instinctively, that the most senior officers of the fire of the New York City Department of Firefighting were on their way in to help people not running away at this time. Bill Blakemore is in Lower Manhattan at the moment. Bill?
Peter, we are beginning to see a little bit more movement here of these large operations for search and rescue, which have been staged here during the day. They've been moving down the street past us here. But we had ABC crews come back just in the last few minutes, including correspondent Don Daler, telling us there are still flames coming out of the base of the trade towers. They're pouring water onto it, trying to get the trade towers themselves cooled down enough to move into the very center of it. There are search and rescue operations going on around the edge of the base of the trade towers, but a couple of buildings there are still on fire as well. We have seen some of the heavy equipment beginning to move some of the rubble out. It's just the beginning of a long process that's going to be, beginning to truck a little bit of it out. We have at the same time hundreds of firemen and volunteers and search and rescue workers here at what is nearly midnight in New York, standing by in these darkened streets. It's a very eerie feeling around us because the electricity is out all around this area. There are a few floodlights, but many of the streets completely dark as everybody waits for it to get even cooler at the center so they can begin the operation, which is really just around the edges at the moment.
Thanks very much, Bill Blakemore, who we will go back to on a regular basis. All our reporters have been on the scene since the beginning, and so have these firefighters. An extraordinary collection of uniforms you've seen today. There's the police department, of course, and the fire department as well. And you'll see from time to time a jacket with ATF on the back of it, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, which had an office in the World Trade Center in New York. So these men now working in the search and hopefully rescue operation tonight have no place to work anymore, as do any number of people. 50,000 people, we've said it many times, worked in the Trade Center. And earlier today, we'll try to get it up again, you get some sense of the enormous amount of commerce and business and government business that was done in the trade towers. And said it before, it was just at that moment when people were coming to work or perhaps had not come to work. And that's one of the reasons we're so uncertain about the magnitude of the human tragedy there tonight, because as we have been told by people who managed to get out of the trade tower, that some people got out of the building, of at least the northern building, where the first aircraft hit, from some of the very highest floors close to where the explosion occurred, and many people got out in an orderly fashion from the lower floors. So we have no estimate whatsoever of the number of people who died. And as you all know, it's been an extraordinary day for the president, in part because we've seen the presidency at work in terms of security and the shield that just forms around the President of the United States, keeps the President and the Vice President separate. The leadership in Congress was whisked away to a, quote, secure location, as it turned out, outside Washington. But ABC's Ann Compton was with the President. Before we go to her to hear from her the moments which she and very few other people witnessed today, who at least can talk to us, here's what the President had to say, or in part what the President had to say to the nation. He's talked to the nation a couple times today, but here's what he had to say when he got back to the White House tonight.
America was targeted for attack because we're the brightest beacon for freedom and opportunity in the world, and no one will keep that light from shining. Today, our nation saw evil, the very worst of human nature, and we responded with the best of America, with the daring of our rescue workers, with the caring for strangers and neighbors who came to give blood and help in any way they could. Immediately following the first attack, I implemented our government's emergency response plans. Our military is powerful and it's prepared. Our emergency teams are working in New York City and Washington, D.C. to help with local rescue efforts. Our first priority is to get help to those who have been injured and to take every precaution to protect our citizens at home and around the world from further attacks.
Excerpts from the President's address, which he and his staff didn't have an enormous amount of time to work on, but seems in large measure to satisfy people all over the nation tonight in terms of what he actually said. What government will do now is the question for tomorrow. But as we said, ABC's Ann Compton was with the President from the beginning of his trip today. She was the pool reporter on Air Force One today and had this quite a, you there, Ann?
I am indeed.
This astonishing trip around the country with the President. We left you, I think, and it's worth, I think, perhaps revisiting the video of it, when you arrived in Nebraska and the President was taken into a bunker at what used to be and still is a Strategic Air Command headquarters base.
This is a place, Peter, where they knew the president would be able to teleconference with the vice president who was here at the White House, even though most of the offices were evacuated. He was in a secure place of the Situation Room. But you can see the president getting out of a motorcade, and instead of these great, huge, important buildings at Offutt Air Force Base, the president and a group who was with him, he had a skeleton staff with him, he had a number of members of the military from the air base, and he gets out of a sedan and look at them pile into this small yellow building. This was the entrance that led to a big underground bunker where the complete teleconferencing setup was ready to go. He used it for about an hour and a half, able to see Dick Cheney, able to see Condoleezza Rice here at the White House while they plotted what to do, what they knew, and the president began to make the beginnings of his address tonight. It was also the time, we were told, when the president said it is right for him to be back in Washington at the end of the day to show Americans that the federal government isn't shut down.
Then you described the fairly lengthy journey back from Nebraska to Washington and the extraordinary sight of fighter aircraft on your left and right wing securing the president's airspace.
You know, this was the one flight of the day, Peter, when we knew as we took off where we were going. They said, yes, the president's going back to Washington. We assumed Andrews Air Force Base. And the president's press secretary came back to where just 5 of us were filling up the back rear of the plane. And he said, Ari Fleischer said, come look at this. And as you can see, this is off the left wing of the aircraft. This is where there was an F-16 sitting right off the president's wing. And frankly, it gave great comfort for those of us who we figured the planes were with us most of the day. And on the other wing, 2 F-15s on the side that the president would be able to see from his cabin as he worked on the remarks in his speech. It is so unusual to see that kind of physical security. The same was true when we landed at Andrews, how quickly he went aboard his helicopter. In fact, you and I were on the air at that moment. We had been told, don't say that he's going to helicopter. But Peter, how dramatic when that chopper came down around the White House South Lawn and the beautiful sunset, golden light, and behind him a huge plume of gray smoke from the still smoldering Pentagon. Press isn't usually allowed to helicopter with him, but they had us on a chopper right behind him. And it was a dramatic scene to show just how intense the effort was to keep the president safe. And this is for the president, it was also an unusual day. We haven't seen this man tested by fire, and we saw George Bush take the full brunt of everything today. Peter?
Thanks, Andy. Ann Compton, who's had this extraordinary day with the president, and we want to talk to her again. But we have on the phone now in California, Alice Hoagland. Ms. Hoagland, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
First of all, let me say how very grateful we are that you take the time under such circumstances to call us, or sorry, to talk to us, not to call us, but to talk to us about what you know about today. I should tell you that Mrs. Hoagland, are you Mrs. Hoagland?
Miss Hoagland, I'm
Okay.
the mother of Mark Bingham.
I know you are. The mother of Mark Bingham, who was on United Airlines Flight 93 that crashed in Pennsylvania today. And Ms. Hoagland has agreed to tell us, I think, what your son said to you from the aircraft. Can you tell us from the beginning?
Yes, that's correct. The phone rang about 6:45 this morning, and Carol Phipps, a friend of the family, answered it, and she heard a male voice say, get Kathy or Alice quickly. And she did. She went and got Kathy, who is Mark's aunt. That's my sister-in-law. Is her home here. I heard Kathy running down the hall. Kathy spoke to Mark. I heard her say, "We love you too, Mark." And I coming out of my room, she said, "Come talk to Mark. He has been hijacked." And I got on the phone. I heard Mark's voice. He said, "Mom, this is Mark Bingham." He was so flustered, I guess, giving me his last name. And he said, "I just wanted to let you know that I love you." He was repeating that, the same thing he had told Kathy a moment before. I told him, "We love you, Mark." And he said, "I'm on a flight, flight 93, United Flight 93 from Newark to San Francisco, and there are 3 guys that have taken over the flight, and they say they have a bomb. And I'm calling you from the airphone on the plane," meaning not his cell phone, I guess. I found out since that he was sitting in the last part of first class and that the flight was fairly light, not very many passengers 45 people aboard. So he may well be able to take a proactive part in that, and what they intended to do and target. I certainly hope so, anyway.
Ms. Hoagland, I hate interviews like this at this moment, and I'm sure you are suffering in ways that we cannot imagine. Did your son say anything else to you about the circumstances on board the flight?
No, I wasn't able to. He was cut off. Can you hear me all right?
I can indeed.
The plane, the phone went dead after a few seconds. I got the impression that he was being distracted badly by something going on around him. I didn't hear anything except the sort of confusion. I didn't hear any explosions, any yelling, just voices, and then he seemed quite distracted about something. Quite calm voice, though. He was a very composed fellow, and then he repeated that he loved us. He emphasized to me that what he was telling me was true. I told him I believed him, that we loved him, and the phone went dead. But I have been asked since. We immediately called the FBI, and they made any reference to any other weapons being used. They had to tell them no. They made mention of knives. We had a moment to speak. I think the reporter from San Francisco that
Mrs. Hoagland, how old was your son, and what did he do?
He's 31 years old. He's president of the Bingham Group, a public relations firm in San Francisco with an office in New York.
And have you talked to anybody in the government this evening? Has anybody in the airline or the government been in touch with you?
Well, United Airlines has called me to confirm that Mark was on the flight. The FBI has been in touch with me and has come out. Two of the representatives came out this morning in response to our call to them.
Well, Ms. Hoagland, thank you. Thank you for sharing this with us and with the nation. This is a day for you that we won't even begin to imagine, but I think we're...
I'm glad to be able to share what I have been able to find out.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. That's Alice Hoagland on the phone from California, we're told. We're told it's Alice Hoagland on the phone from California, the mother of Mark Bingham, one of the passengers on United Airlines Flight 93. Ms. Hoagland says she's been in touch with United Airlines since. It all seems to fit with early reporting that we had heard today about some of the passengers on United 93 managing to talk. She says the airphone, not his cell phone. Forget that many airplanes have airphones now. And there was chaos on the airplane. He was distracted. The phone went dead. And we know that 38 passengers and 7 crew died in this crash in Pennsylvania on an airplane that had, at least according to one or two sources we've spoken today in the Federal Aviation Administration environment, had asked to change its flight plan for Washington before it crashed for reasons we do not understand at this point in Pennsylvania. This has been a day, whether it's on the phone at great distance or closer up at the scene of a disaster, when people have been searching for news and connection and friends and relatives. John Quinones has one such example.
These are children who go to school right across from the Twin Towers. They were evacuated during the chaos. The faces of innocence, worried and frightened.
What did you hear?
I heard a big boom.
What happened then?
And it sort of shaked. Some kids were crying because their mom and dad were upstairs.
Among the people inside the burning towers, this little girl's father.
I was scared that my dad was still in there.
You still don't know.
Her name is Jane Schoenholt, her mother Brenda, and sister Remy.
Well, my husband works in the World Trade Center, so it was more him.
Right across the street.
And she was in the school right down there.
What went through your mind?
Very much.
A lot of people I know are dying.
I just want my dad, I want my animals.
Her dad, Steve Schoenholt, runs a restaurant on the concourse level of the Twin Towers. He spoke to his family by phone this morning after the first explosion.
Why didn't he evacuate?
Because he thinks he's too tough for those terrorists.
But they haven't heard from their father since.
So let's go find him. Come on.
We follow them for blocks and blocks throughout the disaster zone.
I'm just used to walking over here and just seeing, the Twin Towers. It's scary to see just smoke. And that's it. I mean, that's my home, and it's gone.
Just a few blocks from their home,
Everyone back on the sidewalk, please.
were stopped by police.
Fortunately, right now, until we know that it's safe, we're asking everyone to move back.
Now, the people that were evacuated from the World Trade Center, where would they be right now?
Unfortunately, they are all over.
Officer, they're looking for their father who was in the building.
I understand. Unfortunately, my wife is in the building, and I still haven't heard from my wife. So.
On a cell phone, they call to see if Steve has turned up at one of his other restaurants.
Hi, is Steve there? Steve. Yeah, okay.
Does that mean he's gone, or is he still alive?
No, she just hasn't heard from him.
They continue their desperate search, past the rubble, past the screaming rescue vehicles, and then more barricades.
Okay, this is a secure location,
You
so
can't
we
go
can
in.
step aside and walk. Oh, it's a yellow one.
A secure location?
How do you feel right now?
I'm scared that my dad, we might not find him. I feel like he's alive. I just want to find him and make sure.
They run into one of their neighbors, who points them toward a police command center several blocks away.
And tell them your situation and that they will escort you to your house.
Yes,
Right there at Pier 40. Thank you.
It's another long walk, and at the end, it once again seems fruitless.
And do you know anything about when we'll be able to get in there to get our animals?
There's nothing here.
But then, as Brenda is in the middle of another desperate phone call trying to find her husband,
Good to do that. We'll do it then.
What?
one little happy ending on a day with so much anguish and so much heart.
In the building, I cried the whole way. I saw it coming down. Oh, no.
In search of Steve. A happy ending where there have been so few today, and God, I didn't know where that was going for a moment there. And when they encountered the policeman and said they were looking for their father, and he said his wife was in the World Trade Center too, that was very difficult. Mayor Giuliani reports, Mayor of New York City, that some survivors have been pulled from the rubble tonight. And that is a huge relief that some survivors have been pulled from the rubble tonight, a huge relief to all of us, and a relief, too, I'm sure, to Frank Donahue from the American Red Cross, who's a member of the National Disaster Response Team for the Red Cross and came in today from Philadelphia.
Good evening. I'm Ted Koppel reporting tonight from London. I know that some of you have over the past several, indeed the past many hours, been watching my colleague Peter Jennings. I hope Peter is still sitting there in New York. Some of you have been watching local broadcasts. Peter, before I let you go, and Lord knows you have been putting in Herculean labors over these past few hours, this is so much, this business that you and I are in is so much a matter of perspective. Those of you who were watching at the end of these last few minutes when you were talking know that the perspective of people who are in agony, waiting and wondering whether their loved ones are still alive, that perspective is perhaps the easiest to understand. There are people also laboring with whom you've been talking at response and what the United States as a great nation is going to do in response to all of this. I wanted to get from you, before you go off and get some well-deserved rest, just your perspective on what you've been covering together with our ABC News colleagues over these last many hours, and your thoughts before you leave for this evening.
I think it's very difficult, Ted. I think you put your finger on something really important. Those of us who do these kind of jobs are in some respects robbed of perspective because we're operating in a pretty isolated environment. And we're the beneficiaries of people's anger and analysis and love and affection and sorrow and hope as it gets processed through the news division. But one of the things it's very hard to do is to have an overall sense of perspective sitting in this chair over many, many hours. But you also say something else which is hard for the country to understand, hard for all of us to understand, both individually and collectively, I think, at times like this, and that is simply how complicated this is. When a nation as great as this, which stands in most respects for so much that is good, but is seen by so many people, by many people in the world, as standing for things which are not good, is attacked, the nation, particularly if it's powerful and therefore knows its limitations, is, I think, suffused with the notion of anxiety because you can't do as much about it. I think it's very hard for us at the moment to understand how angry many people in the world are at the United States. You know, you and I have the benefits. Please tell me if I go on too long. You and I have had the benefits of working for many years overseas, much of it in the developing world, in my case in the Middle East, in yours in Asia, both of us in Africa. You've just had this extraordinary trip in the Congo. And so we are fortunate. Many Americans are not exposed to the profound antipathy, anger, and now manifested in hatred that people have for the United States because it's a big power and because they see it on the wrong side of issues. So I'll get out of your way at the moment now by just simply saying I think the most difficult thing for me over all of these hours is to have an overall sense of perspective and just try to take advantage of other people's.
Peter, thank you very much. Go off, get some much-deserved rest, and see if you can decompress a little before you have to come back into the hot seat again. The point that you and I have both been making, and it's one that I just want to emphasize before we go into this next phase now of trying to analyze what is going on, is that in this job, the best that you and I can hope to do is to take fragments of what is going on everywhere and by putting it together give people a sense of what is going on. I know many of you have just come back from a long day's work and you want to be updated on the latest news. We will try and do that for you. Some of you have been glued to your television sets all day long and you want some more thoughtful discussion. We will try and add to the thoughtful discussion you've already been hearing in the segments that you've been watching. But I'd like to begin with one of my Nightline colleagues, John Donvan, who has been spending the day putting together a number of reports that we'll be bringing you over the course of the next few hours, one of them having to do with the investigation thus far. And John, if you are in place, and because you and I are thousands of miles apart right now, it's a little difficult sometimes for me to know who is ready and who is not. I'm hoping that John is there either live or on tape, whichever you have. John, if you're live, indicate your presence, would you?
I'm talking to you and hearing you right now, Ted.
Very good. Tell me what you've put together here, and tell our audience at the same time.
Well, what I've really been doing today is relying an awful lot on some very, very good reporting by my colleagues at ABC News and the various bureaus around this city and actually around the country and around the world. All day long we've been hearing anything that ranges from rumor to hard fact and sifting it, and what I'm putting together in a report I think we're about to see is, at this point, the arithmetic of that, what we know so far, what it adds up to, and what it does not add up to. So if that report is ready to go, I think you'll know that and I'll know that, and we'll see it in just a moment. Otherwise, we can keep talking.
For roughly the first 24 hours,
a huge explosion now, raining debris on all of us.
Every image spoke of destruction.
We better get out of the way!
Confusion, vulnerability, and darkness. Darkness especially over the questions of who flew those planes into the towers and how did they take control of them and why.
The Department of Justice has undertaken perhaps the most massive and intensive investigation ever conducted in America.
Today, U.S. authorities said they made progress on answering some of those questions. Some of what they were up to we could see. Late last night, the FBI seized a car parked near the American Airlines terminal at Boston's Logan Airport. This was ABC News at sunrise this morning.
And it is believed that that vehicle was being driven by at least some of these suspects. And we're getting
further information about that, the Boston Herald is reporting that of those suspects, that they believe one of them was a trained pilot. And, again, consistent with what George was saying just a few minutes ago, that some of these suspects flew to Boston early Tuesday morning from Portland, and that they had entered this country from Canada.
The FBI also identified a hotel that one team spent the night in South Portland, Maine. 2 suspects left another rental car in Maine and were seen on videotape.
I can tell you that the 2 individuals are both males in their mid to late 30s, based on the photo that I saw, and that each one was carrying some type of small shoulder bag, not a real bulky one, but something small. Both kind of dark complected, dark hair.
Also this morning in Coral Springs, Florida, neighbors reported that FBI agents overnight raided a house listed as the address for a man named Mohammed Atta, an Egyptian who was believed to be a hijacker on one of the jets that rammed the World Trade Center. They got the address from Atta's driver's license. He is a known associate of Osama bin Laden. While in Florida, Atta was trained as a pilot by this flight instructor.
We're looking as a commercial outfit in the United States to train people. And if these people come with the right paperwork, immigration, etc., passports, then we did our job and we want to train them.
This morning, the president was on television.
The American people need to know we're facing a different enemy than we have ever faced. This enemy hides in shadows and has no regard for human life. This is an enemy who preys on innocent and unsuspecting people, then runs for cover. But it won't be able to run for cover forever.
By noon today, some of the shadow apparently lifted. ABC News had learned that the FBI now knew the identity of all of the hijackers, at least 12 of them, from countries that included Saudi Arabia and Egypt.
The 4 planes were hijacked by between 3 and 6 individuals per plane, using knives and box cutters, and in some cases making bomb threats. Our government has credible evidence that the White House and Air Force One were targets. A number of the suspected hijackers were trained as pilots in the United States.
We have, in the last 24 hours, taken the manifests and used those as an evidentiary base, and have talked to many of the families of the victims, and have successfully, I believe, identified many of the hijackers on each of the 4 flights that went down.
Also today, the Boston police raided a hotel, detained 3 people, 2 women and a man. Outside Providence, Rhode Island, they stopped an Amtrak train and took away 1 man. Late afternoon at the White House, the president's spokesman goes public with what before had been only a rumor.
We have specific and credible information that the White House and Air Force One were also intended targets of these attacks.
The plane in question is the one that ultimately flew into the Pentagon. Early this evening, investigators were dusting for fingerprints at the check-in counters at Dulles International Airport. Now what happened yesterday makes a little more sense, the way that people were at first evacuated from the White House rather casually, and then when it was realized one of the planes was headed their way, people were told to drop everything and run, and they did. And if Air Force One was a target, it also explains why the president hopscotched around the South for several hours yesterday, escorted by jet fighters, before returning to Washington. Add to all this searches of several houses in at least 3 states, and late tonight, another one in Hamburg, Germany.
Auf die Anschläge auf das World Trade Center und das Pentagon verwickelt gewesen sein. Über die Art der Tatbeteiligung konnte noch nichts gesagt werden, aber die...
And Ted, we have search warrants being executed overnight in Florida, New Jersey, and Massachusetts, and as we've said, other states. As far as we know, no arrest warrants have been issued. And there are just so many moving parts to this tonight that there were some of it we decided to discuss outside of the report because it's a little bit slippery. But that raid on the hotel in Boston, it's not really at all clear what happened there. They were led to the hotel reportedly by some information they picked up in one of the rental cars, led them to a specific hotel room there, and agents were surprised when they reached the room they were looking for, opened the door, and 3 people walked out. They detained those people, the 2 women and 1 man that we referred to. They have not arrested them, they have detained them, and it's not clear whether these people were involved or not. In fact, in all of these cases, of all of the people detained today, they're still not saying that they know whether or not for sure that they are suspects. They believe that they may have some link to Osama bin Laden, but they're not sure. Also want to point out, in one sense you can say it's amazingly quick response to already know, they say, the names of all of the hijackers. On the one hand, that is amazing, but what is also amazing is the implication of the fact that these men were receiving pilot training in the United States. Some of them were certified as pilots in the United States over a period that lasted at least a year. They've been here, they've been registered, they've been using their names and addresses and driver's licenses, which is allowing them, authorities now, to track these people to where they actually lived and where they went to school. And they got away with it for all that period of time. Even though a lot of them were known associates of Osama bin Laden and were on watch lists, they weren't being watched at the right time.
Actually, John, you touched on the very question I was just about to raise with you, and I'm going to be asking questions of all of our colleagues tonight, some of which you're not going to be able to answer. But 2 of those people, as you correctly point out, were on an FBI watch list. Is there any explanation yet as to how and why they were able to get into the country?
All we've heard are theories that they may have come in through Canada, they may have been smuggled in, they may have come in using false identity. But even if they came in under false identity or slipped into the country, they very quickly established what you might call standard legal identity. And we're filling out forms with the FAA to apply for pilot's licenses. So no, we don't have an answer to that.
John, I'll be coming back to you several times before our block of programming is over this evening, but thank you for what you've just reported. Nightline's Dave Marish is on the streets of New York City, just a few blocks from the site of the search and rescue effort. And Dave, at times like this, all I can say is, what can you tell us?
Ted, about 5 blocks from here, about 5 blocks south of here, in the absolute center of a brightly flood-lit disaster area, is a large firefighter with an almost as large magnetic whiteboard in front of him that has hundreds of numerical units on it in several colors. These just some of the many units of the New York Fire Department, Police Department, and dozens of other law enforcement and emergency service agencies from the whole metropolitan area that cover this area. It looks something like an anthill because the people are dwarfed by the massive size of the wreckage. When a 1,350-foot tower comes down, even in pieces, it makes a mountainous wreckage. It is at least 60 or 70 feet high, and behind its crest, a big black cloud of smoke continues to rise from what can literally be called the well of the world's sorrows. 82 people are known to have died here. The mayor of New York has requested 6,000 body bags. Those 2 numbers give you, I think, a very good sense of how little has been penetrated of this wreckage and how much more horror there is to be uncovered.
David, I want to move around to a number of our colleagues this evening, but before I let you go for the moment, and I should point out that we'll be coming back to you again also. When you spoke of the 80 known dead, you do not mention, of course, the firemen and the policemen who we know have died in the wreckage. Just a quick word on them. Lord knows they deserve mention at the top of this broadcast.
They certainly do, Ted. 202 New York City firefighters are still missing. 57 police officers, 200 other state employees. And I must say that missing must be presumed dead now. To see this wreckage, to have looked at this massive pancaking of floors and window frames compressed into, as I say, still a pile 50, 75, 80 feet high, but that was once 1,350 feet high. The vertical compression of the collapse of this building almost certainly has killed everyone who was within it. One note, though, Ted, that I want to pass on. The largest single renter in the World Trade Center, with 21 floors occupied by 3,500 employees. Morgan Stanley, the financial business company, reported that most, no hard number here, but most of their 3,500 employees on 21 floors in the area that was struck by the plane escaped this building and are alive tonight.
And one of the biggest jobs over these next few days, and this is one instance in which the internet is going to be of enormous value, and maybe we can talk about that a little bit later too, is that people now are trying to find out quite literally by making contact and asking those who have survived to let people know. The compilation of lists is going to be, in many respects, the principal focus of this effort over the next few days. Dave Marish was talking just a moment ago about how the wreckage looks from the outside. We're going to get an extraordinary look now at how it looks from the inside. I'd like to turn to my Nightline colleague Michelle Martin in New York, who is joined by an amateur photographer who has some extraordinary video. Michelle?
Ted, I'd like to introduce you to Tim Cothran, who's actually a professional video journalist. He is a freelancer for ABC, and he was able to get inside what we are all calling ground zero of the World Trade Center today. And as you pointed out, he has some rather extraordinary video that we would like to show you now. We've condensed it, obviously, quite a bit. He shot about an hour of it, more than an hour. And Tim, why don't you tell us what we're seeing here? And about what time did you go in?
I started shooting tape about 2:30 in the afternoon. We entered the big atrium of the old the financial center, and this atrium used to be absolutely gorgeous. But in order to get to the wreckage, we had to go through this other building. At the top of these stairs, there was some graffiti that was actually written in the sand that's everywhere as a dedication to the brothers of all the firemen, and they all consider themselves brothers. And it's very, very important to them that they be remembered. And I thought that was a very special thing there.
What are you hearing here?
Well, a lot of saws, a lot of hubbub. And you walk forward, and here's this panoramic window of this vast, vast, vast destruction and all this activity going on outside.
What was the temperature like in there? Was it hot? Was it uncomfortable to be in there?
No, well, you know, we've been very fortunate that these days have been so beautiful in New York City. So it was eerie. Here you were in this enormous amphitheater of destruction, and it was just one of the nicest days of the year. But a tremendous amount of sawing and banging. And the guys work in teams. They help each other out. Sometimes if they find a particularly hot or interesting spot, they'll work in groups of 10 or a dozen. And it's all hands-on work. They're not using any heavy tools here, as you can see. They're going bit by bit. It's arduous, it's hard, and these guys are putting all their effort into it.
It also seems rather dangerous. I see many jagged pieces of metal. Did you have a sense of being in danger while you were on top of the rubble?
There's tons and tons of broken glass all over the place. I only had tennis sneakers on, so I was pretty worried. But you picked where you walked, and you just choose where you stepped.
What are we seeing here?
Well, this is poignant in that this is a fire truck. This is a badly charred fire truck. And it's one of the few things in this valley that has been actually kind of cleaned off and hosed off. Because it means a lot to these guys. I mean, you can see it's absolutely destroyed. The tires are burned, all the rigging is destroyed. And they're using it sort of as a table, as a setup area. And it really means a lot to them. It's a staging area, as well as a place where some people get very, very emotional because A lot of guys died. A lot.
And paying their respects.
And paying their respects.
Even as they continue to do the job to which they've been assigned today.
Absolutely.
Did you have a sense of being very far up? Did you have a sense of being a couple of stories up atop the rubble there?
It was really hard to gauge elevation because you're surrounded by some high pieces as well. You're sort of just this sensation of being in something of a valley. And it's just everything is smashed to atoms. There are no big pieces of anything.
And I think that this photograph speaks for itself. I think that everyone will recognize what is occurring here, that the remains of someone are being removed.
Exactly. In the 2 hours that I was there, I saw at least 10 body bags being lifted out, and they seem to find 2 and 3 sets of remains, and they used dogs. They called the dogs in, and the dogs have been there for, I'm sure, quite some time. In fact, before I left, they actually retired the dogs. The dogs actually got very fatigued, and they gave them the afternoon off, or the rest of the afternoon, which they certainly deserved. And they helped pick up body scents and so forth.
A sight that has become rather familiar from disasters in which Americans have volunteered around the world, but not one I think Americans expect to see here.
Just everybody pitching in, you know, it's the bucket brigade syndrome where guys just move stuff out, they move it to the outside. And it was really hard because even though this disaster only happened a day ago, these cadavers are starting to decompose, and it was hard. It was hard for everybody, and it made everybody realize that it's only going to get worse in coming days. These guys work in teams. They'll investigate a nook, a cranny. They'll put their heads together and come up with a plan.
And they're crawling under rather large slabs of plaster and concrete and metal. They don't seem very well protected.
Well, that's their job. They love it. They do it. There they are, scaling up enormous pieces of debris. And so as I was leaving, at about 5:15, everyone started running.
A sudden change of energy here. What's going on?
Absolutely. They got a call on the phone, over the horn, that the structure that was adjacent to us was unstable and may come down. So I hit the record button and started running along with everyone. We took a breath here to, you know, see if there was anything else going on, and then we suddenly heard this rumble, which you may hear on the tape, and it scared me to death. And that was it. We just bolted. The 60 pounds of gear I had on me weighed nothing. We just flew out of there, scared to death.
When did you begin to calm back down? How long did it take before your heart rate came back down and you...
Well, I'll tell you what, watching this stuff brings it right back up. I'll tell you that. And it makes you realize what these guys and women are doing and how much it means to them.
Ted, as I said, some rather extraordinary footage from Tim Cothran, freelance video journalist, a freelancer for ABC, and I can tell you that he's still actually covered with plaster dust, and the smell of smoke still clings to him. Ted?
John Donvan just called in, and I'm getting the information from New York. I had forgotten, I knew it, but forgotten that both John's father and your father were New York City firemen. Just keep talking for a moment, because I know this is close to home, and there is one aspect of this story that the two of you have not spoken about, and just keep talking, if you would, about the possibility of survivors and what is being done to find people who might still be there.
Well, Ted, as I wasn't going to mention this, but the reality is my father is a retired New York City fireman, and my brother is an active fireman, and I can tell you that on Tuesday morning, my first thought was of him, and thankfully he called very early, and I was able to assure the rest of the family that he was safe. So, of course, it's ironic to be thinking first of my father at a time like this, and then of my brother, who like many firemen, is second generation, you know, carrying on that tradition, because, as Tim said, they love it. They love the serving the public, and tough on the rest of us, but we appreciate the job that they do, as I think John does also.
I'd like you to pick up, though, on the notion of there may still be, as we have seen from all the earthquakes that we've covered over the years and other instances of terrorism where there are collapsed buildings, people can survive for extraordinary periods of time. Would the two of you just talk a little bit about what is being done to look for survivors?
Well, if John would, I don't know if John would like to pick up, but well, as Tim showed us, that they're working very carefully.
No, I didn't mean John.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Michelle. We've got this little bit of a delay here. I wanted you to talk to Tim, exactly.
Oh, Tim, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I think, as you heard, Ted would like to expand more about what the efforts are being made to search for survivors.
Every effort's being made to search for survivors. In fact, shortly after I got there, there was some talk, some commotion about over in a far southeast corner that they thought that there was some sounds. So, you know, it's tough. It's really tough. But these guys are keeping the hope alive.
The other thing I think that's interesting to point out is that there isn't a lot of heavy equipment, and I think that that can be puzzling to people, except if you consider that one of the only hopes that survivors have is that they're trapped in an air pocket where perhaps there's a conjunction of heavy pieces of material. So one of the challenges for rescuers is to try to move as much heavy equipment, or rather heavy pieces of rubble, as they can without destroying the very thing that is keeping survivors alive. And I think that's one of the reasons you do not see large pieces of equipment rolling willy-nilly across those piles of rubber, and why so much work is being done by hand.
Absolutely. It's all saws and cutting torches, and as you saw, buckets and gloved hands.
And I think the silence, too, becomes important, because that's the only way that rescuers who are understandably running on adrenaline themselves, who are working in teams, can listen for the sounds of survivors. In fact, I think that is what becomes eerie at a moment like this, is just the amount of silence, or just the quality of the silence that so many people working so hard are able to achieve for the purpose of finding people. We also have heard reports of people on cell phones trying to call people to see if they can achieve some help in locating them, but the phone service here has been very spotty, in part because the World Trade Center tower was where the antennas were. So it's a very awful situation under the best of circumstances, but it's also, I think this, as Tim was pointing out, this weird confluence of sort of horror and the kind of heartwarming effect of so many people working together for this purpose. And you saw that today.
It's a tremendous effort, and it just made me realize how long it's going to take to get all that stuff out of there.
How long have many of those men been working without sleep?
I couldn't tell you, except that they're in there and they have their schedules, and they're in there every day for whatever it is, 6-7 hours at least, I'm sure. But they're rotating them now. I mean, they can't burn them out. They have a long road.
And of course, one of the more poignant moments for all of us are seeing remains being removed in these body bags. And without being indelicate, I'd like to ask if any of the rescuers, do you happen to know whether they knew any of the men whom they were removing from that scene?
I don't know about that, but the remains were in pretty bad shape, and at least while I was there, I wasn't aware of any firefighters or EMT types being removed. No.
Tim Cothran, thank you very much for bringing this video to us and for talking with us this evening. Ted?
Mm-hmm.